Canada just launched a $2.3 billion electric vehicle strategy, a $3 billion industrial investment fund, and a $1.5 billion national charging infrastructure plan, all in a single day. That is $6.8 billion in combined public investment aimed at one objective: transforming Canada's auto sector from one dependent on the goodwill of a single trade partner into one that competes globally, independently, and permanently. New EV purchase rebates up to $5,000. Scrapped EV sales mandates replaced by stricter emission standards. $3.1 billion from the Strategic Response Fund to help manufacturers diversify. A new automotive task force with Ontario. Memorandums of understanding with South Korea, Germany, and China. Reduce Chinese EV tariffs from 100% to 6% on 49,000 vehicles. And a tradable credit system rewarding companies that actually build in Canada. Conservatives thought this was an opening to attack. They marched into the House of Commons and accused Ottawa of subsidizing American automakers. They claimed $2.3 billion in taxpayer money was going straight to Donald Trump's auto sector. They demanded the government reverse course. They were loud. They were aggressive. They were wrong. And Mélanie Joly dismantled them in real time. This is not theory. This is happening right now. Since April 2025, Canadian-made vehicles have faced a 25% US tariff on non-US content. Between December 2024 and August 2025, 6,500 auto sector jobs were lost. Stellantis moved the Jeep Compass from Brampton to Illinois. GM ended Bright Drop production in Ingersoll. The sector is under direct attack from Washington. Today we are showing you how one House of Commons debate exposed the deepest contradiction in conservative politics, how Joly weaponized their silence into a strategic dismantling, how Canada's auto strategy is restructuring an entire industry away from American dependency, and why the damage to conservative credibility on trade may be permanent. But before we dive into this story, if you appreciate in-depth analysis like this, hit that like button and subscribe to stay informed on the stories that truly matter. Here, let us start with what actually happened inside the House of Commons. The first conservative intervention framed the entire debate around one central claim: that Canada's $2.3 billion electric vehicle subsidy program was somehow helping the United States at the expense of Canadian workers. The argument sounded like economic patriotism on the surface, but beneath it was a deliberate omission. Not once did conservatives confront the real source of instability in the auto sector. Not once did they directly challenge Donald Trump's tariff campaign that has already cost thousands of Canadian jobs. Instead, responsibility was redirected entirely toward Ottawa. Kyle Seaback, the Conservative MP for Duffer and Caledon and Shadow Minister for Labour, demanded the government explain why American-made EVs would be eligible for the rebate. He called the program inconceivable. He called it an insult. Joly's response was not to beg for understanding, it was to expose the contradiction. She laid out the strategy's two core objectives. First, supporting auto production in Canada and supporting those who invest here. Second, embracing where the industry is going, which is electrification. She noted the coalition of support. Premier Doug Ford endorsed it. The unions endorsed it. The industry endorsed it. Environmental groups endorsed it. Consumer groups endorsed it. The only party that opposed the strategy was the Conservative Party. But Joly did not stop there. She went directly at the core weakness. She asked conservatives a question they could not answer. Why have they never said they oppose US tariffs on Canadian auto workers? Why have they been silent defending the jobs in Brampton, in Ingersoll, in GM's Ontario operations? Why have they never called these tariffs what they are? Unjustified and unjustifiable. This was not a defensive posture. This was strategic exposure. Then she drew a historical parallel that made the strategy crystal clear. In the 1980s, when American car companies were closing auto plants in Canada, the government did not beg Detroit to stay. They embraced the Japanese automakers. Honda and Toyota built plants in Ontario. Those plants are still operating today, decades later. Joly declared that Canada would do exactly the same thing again. Embrace Koreans, Germans, and Chinese manufacturers. Endorse those who build EVs. Create jobs that are not dependent on Washington's mood. The mathematical result of this strategy is simple. Companies that invest in Canada get rewarded with tariff credits, procurement preferences, and unrestricted rebate eligibility. Companies that abandon Canadian workers face reduced remission quotas, clawback notices, and market access restrictions. Here is where it gets fascinating. The conservative attack rested on one premise, that because American-made EVs can technically qualify for Canada's rebate program, the government was subsidizing Trump's auto sector. But the mechanics of the actual program destroy that argument entirely. The rebate only applies to vehicles manufactured in countries with which Canada has a free trade agreement. The $50,000 price cap limits eligibility to affordable models. And here is the critical detail. That price cap does not apply to Canadian-made EVs. A Canadian-built electric vehicle qualifies for the full $5,000 rebate, regardless of price. An American-built EV must cost under $50,000. This is not an American subsidy program. This is a Canadian manufacturing incentive disguised as a consumer rebate. The economic logic chain works like this. The rebate drives consumer demand toward EVs. The price cap advantage drives that demand toward Canadian-built models. The increased domestic demand makes Canada a more attractive location for new EV manufacturing investment. Those investments create jobs. Those jobs replace the ones lost to Trump's tariffs. And the companies making those investments are not American. They are Korean, they're German, they're Chinese. Canada signed a memorandum of understanding with South Korea for industrial collaboration in future mobility. Canada agreed to strategic partnership with China, allowing 49,000 Chinese EVs into the Canadian market at a reduced 6% tariff. Industry Minister Joly confirmed meetings with Hyundai, Volkswagen, BYD, and Chery. She openly discussed joint ventures where Canadian parts manufacturers like Magna, Linamar, and Martin Rea Maparia would partner with Chinese EV companies to build vehicles in Canada for global export. This creates a fascinating dynamic. Canada is absorbing short-term tariff pain from the United States, but every dollar of investment Canada attracts from Korea, Germany, and China is a dollar of manufacturing capacity that will never depend on American trade policy. Canadian auto parts makers are not losing business. They're gaining new customers from 3 continents, and those relationships are being built on trade agreements that span 51 countries and provide access to 1.5 billion consumers. Meanwhile, the Conservatives kept claiming that this program benefits America. They are either lying or they do not understand the mechanics of their own country's industrial policy. The program structurally advantages Canadian-built vehicles. The new partnerships structurally replace American manufacturers. The trade diversification structurally eliminates dependence on a market that proved it will weaponize trade policy. The math does not work in America's favor, it works in Canada's. While the House of Commons debate exposed conservative hypocrisy, the real consequences of Canada's auto strategy are playing out on the factory floor. Since Trump imposed 25% tariffs on foreign-made vehicles in April 2025, the damage to Canada's auto sector has been severe and specific. Stellantis canceled production of the Jeep Compass at its Brampton assembly plant, putting 3,000 direct jobs at risk. That vehicle is now being built in Illinois. General Motors permanently ended bright drop electric van production in Ingersoll, Ontario, eliminating over 1,100 hourly positions. GM then cut 750 workers at its Oshawa plant, affecting 1,500 more across the supply chain. Between December 2024 and August 2025, the sector lost 6,500 jobs, primarily among parts suppliers. Canada's response was not to plead with Washington. It was to punish companies that abandoned Canadian workers and reward those that stayed. The government reduced Stellantis' tariff-free import quota by 50%. It reduced GM's quota by 24.2%. It had issued a formal notice of default to Stellantis under contracts tied to roughly $470 million in federal support for the Brampton retooling. It demanded GM present a plan for Ingersoll within 15 days. Industry Minister Joly announced the government would seek to recover hundreds of millions of dollars from both companies. Here is who pays the price for conservative silence. It is not Ottawa. It is Canadian auto workers who watch their elected opposition spend question period attacking the government for investing in their future instead of confronting the foreign administration destroying their present. The Conservatives accuse Liberals of enabling American dominance, but when Stellantis moved the Jeep Compass to Illinois, Conservative silence was deafening. When GM shut down Ingersoll, conservative silence was deafening. When 6,500 jobs disappeared, not a single conservative stood in the House and said, "These American tariffs are unjustified and unjustifiable." Joly made this point with devastating clarity. She looked across the aisle and said, "On this side, we look people in the eyes and tell them we will defend their jobs." She listed the government's concrete actions: counter tariffs, market restrictions, investment conditions, targeted enforcement, clawback proceedings, new partnerships with Korea, Germany, and China, a $3 billion strategic response fund, a $570 million worker reskilling program for up to 66,000 workers, a $100 million work-sharing expansion supporting 26,000 workers. This is not rhetoric. This is policy. Meanwhile, the combined market share of Stellantis, GM, and Ford in Canada has dropped from 56% in 2016 to roughly 23% in 2025. The American automakers are losing Canada whether they realize it or not, and the government is accelerating that transition. The endgame is clear. Canada's auto sector is being rebuilt, and the United States is not part of the blueprint. The $6.8 billion in combined investment is not a bailout. It is a restructuring. Canada is not restoring the old trade relationship with America. It is building a new one with the rest of the world. And that restructuring is permanent. The Memorandum of Understanding with South Korea does not expire when tariffs change. The strategic partnership with China does not sunset when a new president takes office. The $3 billion Strategic Response Fund does not get reversed. The 51 free trade agreements covering 1.5 billion consumers do not disappear. The conservative position gets worse, not better. Every day they refuse to condemn American tariffs is another day they cannot credibly claim to stand with auto workers. Joly used their silence as evidence of their unseriousness. And the evidence is devastating because it is true. Not a single conservative MP called Trump's 25% auto tariffs what they are. Unjustified, unjustifiable, destructive to Canadian families. The 552,000 Canadians whose livelihoods depend on this sector are watching which party fights for them and which party fights against the government that is fighting for them. Canada builds an auto sector that serves domestic needs first, exports to diverse international markets second, and views the United States as an unreliable customer that does not deserve preferential access to Canadian manufacturing. Joly said it plainly. In the 1980s, when American companies left, Canada embraced the Japanese. Honda and Toyota are still here. That playbook is being executed again with Korea, Germany, and China. The $2.3 billion EV rebate is restructuring Canadian automotive manufacturing for a post-American export model. Buy Canadian procurement mandates do not expire. Tradable credit systems do not sunset. Joint venture partnerships with Asian manufacturers do not get reversed because Washington decides to be reasonable. Trump thought threatening Canada's auto sector would force concessions. He permanently accelerated diversification away from American dependence. Conservatives thought attacking the government's response would score points. They exposed their own refusal to confront the crisis. Joly did not just win a debate. She revealed a structural weakness that cannot be repaired with rhetoric. Canada's auto strategy moves forward. Conservative credibility on trade does not. Canada wins. The silence loses.